I call the Honourable Member Michael Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will accept that this is not ACC's finest hour, and the disclosure of private information in any situation must be an extremely stressful experience for the 7,000 people who were on that spreadsheet. But I will not accept criticism from that party over there, under whose watch and in 9 years ACC was led into financial and operational disarray. The member, Mr. Robertson, can talk about a manufactured crisis, but I remind that member of the sorts of things that the Minister in December 2008 had faced. When the phone rang in Dr. Smith's office in December 2008, and on the other end of the line was the chairman of ACC, Ross Wilson, saying, I know we've just written this really good briefing to the incoming minister, but we forgot to mention the small matter of the fact that the non-earner account is basically insolvent, and can we have a cheque, please, for $305,654,000. That was just to sustain the non-earner account for the following 6 months. He wanted another $1.5 billion in cash to sustain it over the next 3 years. That led to the sacking of the chairman, and rightly so, and it also led to an inquiry which found that the Minister of Finance, Dr. Michael Cullen, deliberately excluded that information from the pre-election fiscal update in breach of the Public Finance Act. And do you know what he did? Do you know what Dr. Cullen did? He blamed Treasury. He blamed the officials. He said it wasn't our fault. $305,654,000, and then said he didn't put it to Cabinet because it wasn't subject to sufficient detailed scrutiny. They'd assessed it down to the last dollar, and it still wasn't good enough for the Labor government. Well, I know what I think about that. I think there was a little bit of stuff being shoved under the carpet. A little bit of nothing to see here, everything's fine at ACC. But we know it wasn't. We know it wasn't because Marion Street signed an agreement that presided over a $2.4 billion loss, followed by a $4.8 billion loss. And do you know what they said? Accounting sophistry. Accounting sophistry. We had Andrew Little, as whatever he was, in charge of the Service and Food Workers Union, saying it was a deliberate hatchet job. He accused the auditors, the actuaries, the Minister himself of generating a false crisis. Well, I tell you what wasn't false, Mr. Speaker, the levies. Because the levies went up by billions. And here's why. Because there was a $7.2 billion deficit to recover, assets of $10 billion and liabilities of $24 billion. Now, I'm an accountant. I'm a chartered accountant, right? So I kind of get this stuff. But it's only really simple math. So listen up. It's really important. $10 billion, $24 billion. What's the difference? It's called $14 billion, and it's a serious crisis, and it's real. The levy increases were real, and the actions that Dr. Smith took as the Minister of ACC...
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Speaker, one of the traditions of this House is when members leave, especially when asked to by members of the government, the fact that they're leaving is not drawn to the attention of the House.
Okay, thank you. The member's absolutely right. I didn't actually hear that someone was mentioning that the member is leaving. But can I say to members on this side, everybody has to leave this chamber at some time or other. It can be for any reason. And I would urge the members to abide by the Speaker's rulings and standing orders that mention. No mention whatsoever must be made of members leaving the House. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What an excellent bit of interference, I must say. Where was I? $14 billion, I think. It was the simple math, wasn't it? 10 billion, 24 billion. It's not that difficult. It might be an accounting number, but it's pretty real. It's pretty real because the levy payers, let's just say this, if we were to shut down ACC tomorrow and that won't happen, what would we need to do? The government would need to write a cheque for $14 billion. So you go to your... The member should try going to their bank manager and saying, look, my business is in really good shape. I've got $10 in the bank, but I owe 24, and everything's going to be fine. You multiply that out by billions, Mr. Speaker, and it's a very serious problem. And here's why it occurred. It occurred because Labor had a come-one, come-all approach to ACC. We warned them when they wanted to change medical misadventure to treatment injury and have all sorts of medical complications. that would be a Pandora's box they should not open. It was costed by the Department of Labour at $8.7 million. I was the president of the Private Hospitals Association. I said that number was a nonsense, and so it proved to be, because that change cost $87 million, a new cost on the taxpayer. We warned them when they proposed to remove the co-payments from physiotherapy consultations that it wouldn't cost anything like the $50 billion they were prepared to invest. It cost $250 billion. And let me tell you about elective surgery, because an interesting thing was happening. Private medical insurers were making sure that claimants get a no letter from ACC before people like Southern Cross would approve private surgery. So I can tell you that applications were put in by surgeons to ACC that said, this is not an accident. Do not approve this claim. All we want is a letter. And ACC would approve it. So let's just talk about a culture of disentitlement, because actually what this government and ACC are having to do under this administration is reverse the nonsense that took place under 9 years and that has cost the levy payers of that scheme in this country billions and billions of dollars, Mr. Speaker. It is not accounting sophistry. It is simply not. It was a real problem, and I congratulate both Dr. Smith and the current Minister, Judith Collins, for turning it around. Now, I want to touch on the Right Honourable Winston Peters' comments about it not being an insurance scheme. And he is quite right on one level. The architect of the Royal Commission report, Sir Owen Woodhouse, was at pains to point out that this should not be an insurance scheme like other insurance schemes, but he did acknowledge that when one creates an incident-based event where payment or rehabilitation follows an accident through no fault, and that the levies are subject to the experience of how many claims and the claims duration, that is by any measure an insurance scheme. What he did say in the report, though, and I think it's very important, is that he said it shouldn't be risk-rated. And in fact, no party, perhaps with the exception of the Greens, now believes that the scheme should not be risk-rated. What that means is that the forestry worker pays the same premium as the office worker in our out-of-parliament offices. Simple nonsense. So the levy differentials are about 10 times. Now, Sir Owen did not say that that was a good idea. There's no one in this House that would now agree with him. He made no reference, in fact, he made passing reference to women. Housewives should possibly get some cover after about 4 weeks suffering an injury, because the time did not have women at work. And it certainly wasn't written for the very modern, multicultural, multi-gender work environment that we now have. This is very important, because the scheme, the Royal Commission report, has been around for 42 years, and the 5 principles that underpin that scheme are still real and enduring. And this government subscribes to them. But the report itself is not a sacred cow. It must move with the times. We are in a very, very different environment than the one in 1967 when that report was written, and I think the changes that are being made are very sensible and necessary, and heaven help us if Labour and the Greens ever get back to the Treasury benches and soften and just leave the scheme to its own devices, bring back a come one, come all scheme. The simple fact is some things are caused by an accident, some things are medical, some things can be both, and there will always be people who are disappointed not to have their claims accepted. Mr. Speaker, the last thing I want to say is directed at the staff of ACC. Now, Mr. Little has said in the media that this is the worst crisis in 38 years of ACC, and some of the senior members of ACC would probably chuckle at that. It's not. They've actually been through the mill on 2 or 3 occasions. And I was a member of the staff at ACC in 1997 during the last pretty big crisis. And they got over it, and they improved it, and they made the scheme better than it ever was. So I say to those the members of ACC, the thousands, 2,500 odd staff right around the country, we back you, we back the things that you do for the 1.7 million claimants, and the vast majority of them who get excellent service, who are compensated and rehabilitated in a fair and timely manner, even when sometimes that involves a little bit of tough love in getting back to work on a part-time or graduated basis, things that I know that some, but not all of the unions would agree with. So I say to them, hang in there, you're doing a fantastic job, and keep up the good work.
The time. The time for this debate has expired. I therefore call on private and local orders of the day. Sorry? Gee, I didn't. Sorry, I'm jumping the general debate. How could I jump the general debate? Would some honourable member